Prynawn da pawb, mae'r digwyddiad hwn ar fi'n dechrau. Good evening all, this event will now begin.
Croeso, diolch am ddod y prynhawn ma. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm Claire Bevan, registered nurse and the senior responsible owner for the digitisation of the nursing documentation project in Wales. And with me today is Fran Beadle, the Chief Nursing Information Officer for Digital Health and Care Wales, leading the standardization of nursing documentation. And also Leslie Jones, the Head of Nursing in Hywel Dda University Health Board and the National Lead for the implementation of the Welsh Nursing Care Record in Wales. We'd like to welcome you to this Welsh Nursing Care Record stakeholder engagement event for our student nurses and university colleagues across Wales. The aim is to share the journey of the development of the digital Welsh Nursing Care Record for adult inpatients as part of the development towards the single patient record. We'd like to thank you for taking time to join us today, and we value your thoughts and feedback to inform the next steps of the Welsh Nursing Care Record for our patients, our staff, our students, organisations and key stakeholders. There will be an opportunity for Q&A, so please share your name so we can get back to you. And there will also be time for questions for Fran and Leslie at the end of the presentation. The April edition of the NHS Wales Digital Nursing Newsletter will include the frequently asked questions and feedback from the 4 stakeholder events we're hosting this month. We will now start the presentation. Thank you, Fran.
Thank you, Claire. Welcome everybody. Apologies, has my screen moved on?
Not yet.
It's not moving. I'm not sure why the screen's not moving, sorry. I'm going to have to unshare and start again. Apologies, everybody. Technical issues, very good for a technical presentation that I'm giving you. Okay, so welcome everybody and thank you for coming to listen to our presentation today. To help you understand why we looked at developing a digital solution for Wales and actually the journey that we've been on. So why did we decide to do nursing documentation? Well, across Wales there was we had been cited on numerous reports from Health Inspectorate Wales, issue reports like the Flynn's report and the Andrews report regarding pressure damage and blood glucose monitoring documentation. So, you know, there was definitely a consensus that there was a need to improve nursing documentation across Wales, and one of those things that to enable that is potentially technology was the way to enable that to happen. So alongside that, a lot of the auditing of documentation across Wales is a manual audit, which takes nurses, takes managers away from the ability to care for patients, but they spend a lot of time manually auditing. And what that also means is that you weren't able to audit care and understand the quality because that would be around a set number of patients. So obviously with the evolution of technology, that potentially could be eliminated by technological processes and allow us to audit the quality of care being provided by nurses for every single patient across Wales. In addition to that, I travelled the length and breadth of Wales to understand what the current state of documentation was, and there was a lot of duplication. You know, when I first went out across Wales, some instances the adult inpatient assessment was up to 72 pages long. Obviously a lot of repetitive questioning within that, just because of the very nature that it's paper. So, and patients potentially would go from the emergency department through to the inpatient care setting, where the same questions and the same documentation was completed on numerous occasions. So that's why it was a decision to undertake how could we improve nursing documentation and actually get our nurses back to the bedside providing the care that they're so good at. I'm really not sure what's happening here, but it won't move. Apologies for this. I'm not really sure why the slideshow is not moving. This is me. Okay. If I give control to Jenna Lee, can you see if you can move the screen forward?
Yeah, bear with me.
Apologies, everybody. This has never happened to me before.
No, it doesn't seem to want to go forward for me either.
No. I'm not sure what to suggest.
Fran, are you able to talk through the slides, and I'll try and see if I can get hold of a copy, and then I'll share them.
Yep.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
Apologies, everybody. This wasn't the experience we hoped to give you. So thinking about technology, so obviously social media is now widely used across life. You know, we use it for online banking, we use it for online shopping. So why wouldn't we think about doing that for our healthcare system? So one of the key things, it was about modifying the language and understanding what people understood from digital technology and how they use it and how they interact with digital across Wales, because the concern was from nursing staff outside was that, you know, they wouldn't be able to do it, they'd mess up, they would delete documents that they'd already created. So the whole ethos around our project and the initiative, that it's been driven by nurses, for nurses, to improve patient outcomes, and that's always been at the heart of our programme, always making sure that we put the patient within that. And as Claire mentioned, this is part of the journey of the single patient record. So how do we ensure that our nurses understand and can use the Welsh Nursing Care Record, but also how can we make sure that our patients can move across healthcare boundaries and that their information follows them? Because I think it's safe to say that a lot of our patients believe this actually happens already, and I would say in some instances this has not been the case. But however, as we become more technically enabled, this is now a real vision across Wales, and in some cases is a reality now, and especially with the Welsh Nursing Care Record. So how did we set out to achieve it? So like I said, historically, it's always been that nurses felt that technology and IT was being done to them. You know, technical people, our developers, our information governance, finance, all of the technical people, the business analysts, it was just felt that we were never part of the process. And why it was really important to us to ensure that nurses were part of that programme. So the idea has been a very truly collaborative process. So whenever we identified standards, we ensured that our multidisciplinary team were included, and that would be physicians, physiotherapists, occupational therapists, dietitians. But actually, obviously, as nursing, you know, our main speciality is to nurse patients. It's not technical. So it was really important that we did this with our technical colleagues who would help advise us in how technology could do this in an appropriate way that was safe and met the needs that nurses wanted on the floor, because based on outcomes of a survey I did initially, you know, nurses wanted something really simple. They wanted some people to be able to support them through that transitional phase, and they wanted their access to all the information in one place. It was very important there was one place. You know, there has been a lot of criticism that technology doesn't improve processes, because essentially you may have to go into multiple different systems to fulfill your role in your daily activities. So our vision for the Welsh Nursing Care Record was that all nurses, midwives and multi-professional team members are confident and competent in the use of WNCR. And what that means is that the nurses on the floor, everybody was capable to use it, but that also meant our students and our agency staff. You know, historically, students have not had access to digital systems within the NHS, so it was very important that we incorporated that into how we developed the Welsh Nursing Care Record. And whatever data was put into the Nursing Care Record, we need to be able to extract those and learn lessons from, you know, what works well, what doesn't work well, how can we, you know, is care being improved because we've changed the model, or we've changed the risk assessments that we use, because technology allows us to do that, to easily extract it so that we can improve the outcomes and experiences, not just for our staff but also for our patients who are moving across services across NHS Wales. So our former NHS Wales Director General, Andrew Goodall, his vision and his expectations were that the staff and patients can move across health and boards and trusts in Wales with standardised and digitised patient records, and nursing obviously were forming part of that, because we are the people that do a vast amount of documentation and assessment in relation to our patients.
Fran, so alongside the slides are now showing.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, so it's okay. on the vision slide. So if you let me know when you want the next one.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. So so alongside that vision of, you know, the Welsh Nursing Care Record, we wanted to ensure that whatever we were documenting in Wales, the vision was that, well, we've got one patient, we've got one nursing profession. So actually, why don't we take that ethos forward and have a standardised language for nursing across Wales, because our patients cross health board boundaries, but so do our staff, so do our students. So for our students, it would be much easier to be taught something in the university that becomes a reality when you come out into the health board. So the vision has always been that we have one standard language for Wales, and the idea and the outcomes of that was about improving standards of care, but improving patient safety, as we were all talking and utilising the same language and the care models. So as you can see in the slide here, our old filing system was a plethora of paper documents that potentially got lost, or there wasn't all the correct amounts of documentation. So our new filing cabinet, as you can see, this is some nurses and students across Wales who are using the Welsh Nursing Care Record to document their care, but actually also share freely and have conversations jointly to understand the care that's been provided and the outcomes that they've been provided, and actually being able to sit down and talk with our patients, showing them what we've actually documented in order to educate them to assist and care for them on their journey. So what did we standardise? So in phase 1, as you can see from the slide, we've standardised our adult inpatient assessment. And like I mentioned, in the first instance, when we went around across Wales, there was potentially 72 pages of adult inpatient assessment documentation. As you can imagine, that's a lot of documentation that I would say 50% of the time wasn't fully completed. And that's not because of any fault of anybody, but it's some of the questionings that were within the documents weren't really appropriate, hadn't evolved over time. And what we found was that during identifying documentation. If, for instance, there was something like the Andrews report or the Flynn report, then a new risk assessment or a new set of documentation went within the paper record. So actually what we did in the process of standardisation was to really look at not only the documentation, why do we document it? Is there still a need to document it, and what's best practice? And by identifying best practice, we also standardised 6 core risk assessments. And in order to do that, we went back to all Wales groups to recommend the best evidence-based risk assessments to use. And along that process, you can see here that there are set timeframes for when those when those assessments need to be completed based on evidence. So as you can see here, our new pressure damage risk assessment, purpose T, you have to do that within 6 hours of admission, falls risk 6 hours, nutritional risk assessment 6 hours, and our pain assessments immediately. You know, if you meet the pain assessment need of a patient immediately, potentially that improves patient outcomes, because then their ability to move is greater, therefore reducing the risk of the risk assessments. And then alongside those was the continence risk assessments and patient handling assessment. So although that was phase 1, and that may seem like a small number of documents, that is potentially the core documents that nursing complete every single day on patient admissions. And as we've moved forward now we're on to phase 2. So phase 1 documents are now live within the Welsh Nursing Care Record. We're now moving on to the standardisation and digitisation of the identified documents there. So we would go out to the health boards, we'll ask nurses from the pilot, what other forms would you like? And actually set a prioritisation model to understand what we're going to provide the most value to nursing. Well, this is how we have identified our phase 2 documents. And in fact, we've now gone into phase 3 and we're looking at what the next current set of documents are. So now I'm going to hand over to Leslie, who's going to tell you all about the user experience and the implementation of the Welsh Nursing Care Record.
Hiya, thank you, Fran, and thank you, Claire. And I hope what you've seen from what's happened so far is when you're introducing anything or doing anything technical, digital, like we're doing this presentation online, it's a team approach. And this was definitely one of the first times in my career that I've ever worked so closely with IT and digital and nursing together to pull this off. So even just doing this presentation, you can see it's a team approach, really. When things go well, it goes very well. And when things go wrong, you need people to pick up different things. And that's what we've learned with introducing the Welsh Nursing Care Record out there in clinical practice. So as Fran has said, you know, we've heard and listened to lots of our users, many of them identified there in the pictures, staff at all levels and also all disciplines, interestingly, our medical colleagues, our OTs, our physios, students, social workers, and indeed patients too. All have brought us insights and challenges, and not least that of access. So we're doing some work nationally to explore giving NADEX Cymru ID accounts to all of our student nurses, and there are loads of student nurses in Wales. You know, around 6,000 across Wales at different stages of their development. So you can imagine this is no mean feat, and it isn't something that we'll be doing quickly. We have to engage a lot of people to do it, but the difference it would make is tangible, and we have a lot of support to undertake this work. Working from home during COVID has also given us unique challenges with our social worker colleagues accessing and wanting, desiring access to the Welsh Nursing Care Record, and that too is something we're investigating. But I suppose on this slide, I really wanted to make the point that the nursing voice has informed all of the assessments and the forms, and now helps us as we give the data back to our nursing managers. And as they look at it and they're investigating the compliance and the quality of the assessments being undertaken with our patients. And I think that's really important, because it's not just, as it sometimes can be in clinical practice, it could feel like we're feeding a beast, but we're actually starting giving meaningful data back to people, so it can start to be understood and they can know the parameters. So if we move on, you might think of this presentation, this software system, as a bit of a faceless software system, but on this particular slide you can see all the individuals, nurses and project manager alike, who've helped us get this far and helped us roll this out across Wales. They've tested, trialled and developed, and probably sweated blood and tears over this to get to the stage that we've got to at this moment in time, and worked with our clinical informatics teams. We didn't have many of these roles prior to this starting, so this is a real first in Wales to have so many clinical staff engaged in the digital world, and it certainly allowed us to open a door on a career development pathway, which Fran will fill us in on a little bit later on. So linking the two and getting clinicians into this space has meant often that I personally have learned a different informatics language, and you have to talk sometimes and understand things in a different way. So I think that's been an education for everybody entering into this. This next slide depicts a map of Wales and the name of the respective chief nursing information officers in those areas, and these are definitely people for you to link in with and know. And if you wanted to, go and spend some time with, or ask them to come and speak to your groups. If you're a student or indeed a lecturer, these are definitely the key people to hook up with, as many of them get involved with not only WNCR, but they have knowledge of systems such as e-prescribing and the up-and-coming projects of rostering and e-obs. Many varied settings already have these other systems in place, because digital, we've opened a door that won't close now, and nor do we want it to, because it's dragging us into this century, and actually it's pushing our professionalism to exactly where it needs to be, and that is what our patients are telling us at the same time. Our CNIO roles, just to say two things about them, is they have been absolutely key in driving this. They are clinicians, so everyone that you see on that image there are nurses by background. They've grown up through nursing and have been immersed in the last sort of 18 months, 2 years in the world of digital, and then interpreting that and going into our clinical settings and selling the concept. And we did think we'd have a bit of a sell on our hands, but in reality, what's happened is the system has more or less sold itself. It has actually been so well received out there and so easy to use that a lot of our staff are fully engaged with this. The next slide is also a Welsh map, and this shows where we're currently live. So if you're a student up in the north or down in the south or towards the east, I can see that WNCR might not be something you're seeing readily in the clinical environments at the moment. However, Cardiff and the Vale and Betsy Cadwaladr and Aneurin Bevan are going to go live with WNCR in the, well, imminently for 2 of them, and Aneurin Bevan possibly in the summer of 2022. So we're hoping that that map will increase its colour range in the next few months, because by the end of 22 it would be good if WNCR is live everywhere. And if we move on, this is what it simply looks like. So it's difficult sometimes to talk about something if half of you maybe haven't seen it, but it's a very clean looking screen. So it's normally set up for you. You can see this one is a practice screen set up for Fran, but it would show the patients that Fran is caring for, has cared for, and it would show them in a list of people, and it would bring up their date of birth, where their speciality that they've been cared for in, and the notifications section there are if risk assessments are outstanding and a need to be done. So it's quite a simple viewpoint of a ward, and we are looking in certain areas about using some of these early frames that you can see in front of you as handover sheets as well, because I think that would be very helpful. Okay, so the next slide, for me, I think this shows the cleanness of the application with the different chevrons on the left-hand side, with the colour rating indicating at a glance whether an assessment has been completed or partially done. You can see by the red and yellows there. And so the system captures everything from patients' allergies to safeguarding questions to mental health capacity. And you can see down the bottom there, measurement, which as we move on, if we were to click on that measurement, the next slide shows what the measurement slide would bring up. And this is absolutely about not just weighing a patient, but it shows that at a glance you can see if somebody's weight has gone up or down, if somebody is in for a long period of time. And you can see down the bottom there about adding a new measurement, because this is all around one patient. In this particular instance, it's a Suzanne Pask. And you can see whether a weight has gone up or down and how important that would be in clinical practice. So as opposed to where we were a few months ago, you'd be checking in the notes for this sort of thing. So there have been many outcomes to WNCR, and the outcomes to date have been absolutely loads. We are formally evaluating the system with Bangor University. Swansea Bay have done an evaluation, and we're undertaking an evaluation with Swansea University. We've engaged with patients, and they have told us how they find the application. And what was interesting was how professional they thought it made our nurses look and feel. And we've communicating with nurses, it wasn't a barrier, as some of the previous research has shown that in some of the early research around nurses using computers, they can be seen as a barrier in clinical practice, but it hasn't been true of these, and that some of that might be down to the devices which we've picked for these areas. Even though the landscape out there is split, and I think Fran and I have emphasised that some of the nursing documentation is digital and the rest is on paper, we can now see the roadmap and the potential for how we are moving and the future systems we're moving towards. Some staff, it won't surprise you, thought that they might see this as an opportunity to leave because I think they thought that it might be too complex for them. But actually the system has proved to be a lot slicker and it has invigorated staff. Certainly where I work in Hywel, we've seen staff say things like it makes them feel more professional, and actually it's a lot quicker to undertake tasks at the click of a button, and it has kept people in work and given them a bit of pride in what they do in what has been a very traumatic 2-year period for everybody with COVID. I've had first-hand experience in Bronglice with our students actually teaching our staff how to use it, because they find the system so easy to click through and quick to use. The whole system does mean that what we have been aiming for is to talk with one voice as nurses in Wales, and that is definitely what we are moving towards. The same assessment forms in all areas, regardless of where you work. And those areas yet to go are using the standard documentation. And actually, this should be easier for our patients moving around the system, because what patients said was they didn't have to duplicate the information that they were giving to people. It was there in front of them. And there are yet more and more forms coming online, as it's been pointed out, and patient safety has been at our core as we move through this. So if we move to the next slide. So what we're working on currently in the background that you might not know about are trying to get our student nurses NHS accounts so that you can access all the systems along with the university accounts that you have. That we will have a new nursing care plan model, and that nursing evaluation is fed back up the line management so that we all understand the true value of nursing at the bedside and categorise what it is we do. And the tranche 4 standardisation, that single nursing voice, is a really powerful tool to have in Wales. So I'm going to hand back over to Fran, who's going to take us hopefully through the career framework, and we've got a short video to show as well.
Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, like Leslie previously mentioned, our nursing informatics leads in Wales, they were the first of their kind. When I first started within NHS Wales, I was the only specialist nurse in Wales with informatics experience. So obviously there needs to be a progression of how we enable them to grow and learn, but also about growing our next leaders as well as growing as our next informatics specialist roles across Wales. So as part of that process, the programme has identified, and we've been working with the University of Trinity St David's, it's something that started out as just a conversation, is now we are at a point where we have a master's for the digital skills for health and care professionals, and the first cohort started this year, and alongside, and I'll go into it in a bit more depth in a minute, and alongside that we've been working with our Welsh Government colleagues and the Florence Nightingale Foundation to develop digital leadership scholarships, but I'll go into detail about these two programmes of work in the next slide. So with regards to the digital skills framework, so like I mentioned, there is a master's programme, but you can step on and step off the ladder at any point. So there's from a university certificate right up to a master's, there is a 3-year programme, and I'm really pleased to say that Welsh Government really supported this programme and funded the first 2 cohorts for this. So we currently have 60 NHS Wales employees who work in health and care in informatics roles, not even in informatics roles, just professionals that have an interest in informatics. They are actually on that journey. The first programme started in September last year. And then alongside that, next slide, is, like I mentioned, the Florence Nightingale Foundation. Now, the Florence Nightingale Foundation have done leadership scholarships for some time, but there has now been a real emphasis on digital scholarships. So working with our Welsh Government colleagues, Claire Bevan and myself, mentor the digital skills programme, and actually HEIW are working closely to align those to the digital leadership with the leadership scholars to have an alumni. And we're in our 2nd cohort of Florence Nightingale scholars. So in total we have 11. The second cohort are just going through finalising their final stages of their programme. But what we aim to do with this programme is all of the projects that they developed are aligned to the Welsh Government's 10-year health and social care strategy, and actually any of the programmes of work that are developed, we aim to make those national programmes, to share the lessons learned from those programmes, but actually for them to be materialised across Wales, so that there is always an end goal, that these programmes of work are not just seen as an individual project, they inform the future of health and social services strategies in Wales. And the latest cohort, which has just been identified, we've got another 6 digital scholars who start in April of this year, so we're into our 3rd cohort. And I think, you know, we've already seen some of the initial scholars moving into clinical informatics roles across Wales and seeing their projects come to fruition across national programmes. Next slide. So there's a lot of info, we've given you a lot of information, and here, this slide, which will be shared with everybody, is all the information relating to the Welsh Nursing Care Record, all the information standards, all the new risk assessments. So if you want to go and have a look, they're freely available. And I'd just like to say thank you all for listening, and now we're going to play you a video, because we can tell you how we think nurses perceive it, but actually hear from them how they perceive it.
Hi, my name is Christine Evans. I'm the ward manager on the Neuro Rehabilitation Unit in East Portobello Hospital. It's become such a fantastic way forward for nursing, in that it's clear, concise documentation. There's no room for error. It highlights all the risk assessments that we need. It's easily accessible for everybody, all the MDT, physios, occupational therapists, speech and language. Anybody can access the WNCR at any time, and it's become a real valuable piece of equipment for the nursing staff.
It's changed how I work because everything is in one place. You never lose a bit of paper and you don't have to run around the wards looking for something.
I think it's better to capture all the information with the patients as well, so you can go through everything in one go. So it definitely saves time, and I think it's better for patient care because it means we can spend more time with them than completing paperwork.
It's a lot easier. All the information's at a touch of a button, all the risk assessments are there, and we can read everybody's writing.
The system's been quite easy to use. We were given a lot of support and reassurance from the IT department when we first got up and running, and the access to it is quite easy to navigate once you get used to it.
Using the computer to input patient notes have been very beneficial. On a personal level, I'm dyslexic and I find it very difficult with my spelling, so it takes me a lot longer to write my notes. But using the computer format has eliminated that problem, so it's levelling out the playing field a bit, really, and actually enabling me to speed up my notes because I'm not having to Google how to spell everything. So it's much easier, and it also makes it easier to understand other people's notes because everyone's got different ways with their handwriting, so it just makes everything clearer.
Hi,
Hi, I'm Trudy Young. I'm the tissue viability nurse here at Velindre. For me, the important thing is about the pressure ulcer risk assessment we use at Velindre, which is a Purpose T tool. The Purpose T tool is part of the risk assessment suite on the WNCR. And what I like about it is that staff, when they're completing it, cannot submit it unless it's completed in full. So where in the past, when we used the paper versions, we had errors and omissions, this doesn't happen with the Purpose T, and that's absolutely superb. Also for me, for audit purposes, I can look back at the scores, look at the equipment being used, and it helps me to give a picture of what's happening to the patients on the ward in relation to their pressure ulcer risk assessments. It's a great benefit to me.
Hi, my name is Jane Brady and I'm the Senior Lead Nursing Informatics Specialist for Betsy Cadwallader University Health Board. For me, we're at a very exciting time in BCU currently because we are planning to go live hopefully the first week of March with the Welsh Nursing Care Record, and that will be in one of our community hospitals. We've started that engagement and had conversations and trying to get plans in place, and the feedback that we're getting currently is that everybody's really excited about it and feel that it's been such a long time coming that they can't wait to get going.
Okay, is it coming over to me? Thank you very much indeed. The video really captures so many voices of our nurses and students across Wales. What I'd like to add some further comments that have come through, certainly when visiting and having the privilege to go out to visit sites now that we're hopefully moving through the COVID period. Staff have fed back about how quickly it is now to access patient information, and particularly when transferring patients between care settings. There's no printing, the legibility of documentation and the timeliness of documentation and the timeliness of completion of risk assessments is improved. The accurate standards of record keeping and all documents in one place. Certainly the work is made easier and faster, and as more nurses have got more confident with the system. So all the staff will be understanding that it's an all Wales standardisation approach. This certainly has been a huge feat. It takes quite some time to get clinical consensus on standardisation. So I'd just like to ask Fran a question in relation to the standardisation process before we come back to some of the other questions. How long does it take to standardise a document, Fran?
Thanks, Claire. In all honesty, it's dependent on what document it is that we're standardising. So for instance, the adult inpatient assessment probably took about 18 months to standardise, but what we need to appreciate is that the standardisation happens with the specialist group, and for the adult inpatient assessment it was the nursing informatics lead with the help of various specialist communities, such as safeguarding, such as patient forums, such as sensory needs. So that document obviously took a significant time to standardise, and then what would happen was that would then go through a health board approvals process to ensure that everybody within each health board approved, that was then signed off by and approved by the directors of nursing, culminating with the issue of a Welsh Health Circular from the Chief Nursing Officer for Wales. And there were times, for instance, the new pressure risk assessment, where not everybody did agree that they wanted a standardised assessment, and actually that's where more discussions were held. So like I said, it's dependent on what it is. If it is a standardised, the simpler documents are a lot easier, but as we've progressed into phase 2, the documents seem to be approved and standardised a lot quicker than they were in phase 1.
Thank you. Back over to me. Okay, so can I just pose some of the questions in the chat Q&A to Leslie and Fran? Sue, nursing lecturer from Cardiff, are these timescales going to apply to the emergency care settings for the implementation of the Welsh Nursing Care Record? So Leslie, would you like to take that answer about the interface between the emergency unit and how soon we're able to start the Welsh Nursing Care Record documentation?
That is an interesting one, because in our ED departments there is a different system being implemented across Wales, and that's called the WEDS system, and our WNCR seems to pick up from minor injuries into when the patient actually joins the ward team. And we are doing some work on how WNCR could be started in ED, but at the moment there's the rollout of WEDS, which I think would probably be the front door entrance into ED and then into the WNCR system for those people who are staying in. But I'll happily pick that up with Sue if you would like to get in touch afterwards about the national work going on in ED.
Thank you. Thanks. Back over to me just for the next question. So the other question that's from Sarah, student nurse in Howell Dda, and Leslie, you might like to take this again. Will the Welsh Nursing Care Record be implemented in the community setting, or will the Welsh Community Care Information System remain in place?
Okay, so yes, we have thought about that, because I think our community colleagues did look at it and they did love it. That's the first thing to say. But once again, there's already a tender process out there and a system that's already being looked at in our community setting, certainly in Howell Dda, and in varying degrees throughout Wales. Because of the nature of how our district nursing teams work, they interface a lot with our social services. So we were looking at the WICIS system in the community because it was to interface with our social care staff, but where we are at the moment, we're looking at giving access to WNCR and the view of WNCR to all of our district nursing teams. Once again, really happy for you to get in touch through email, and I can talk you through the detail of some of that.
Okay. Thank you very much, Leslie. Just going to pick up on another question here. This one is from Jenna Bond, student nurse. She says, not necessarily a question, but a word of acknowledgement for all the effort, time and energy that has gone into this project of the Welsh Nursing Care Record. This will be a brilliant tool, provides more time for the patient, and clearly the IT support has been very beneficial. As a student nurse, this will enable me to be a better healthcare professional, and I look forward to using the Welsh Nursing Care Record. Superb. Thank you very, very much, Jenna. That's really a lovely comment. We've got from Mike as well, Mike Johnson, who has actually sadly had to leave at 3 o'clock, saying thanks for your work on this project. And this webcast along with the other HEIs. We've rolled out the electronic practice assessment documentation for nursing. There are several problems with the access for students which we have begun to collate. Before we went live, and we'd hoped that mobile and WNCR would drive through the improvements in access, but it's 15 months on, and we're grateful to our local nursing informatics lead supporting investigation of access. Black spots remain. Will your project contribute to help students with access, and can the Welsh Nursing Care Record devices be used for students' electronic practice assessment documentation? So Leslie, would you like to take that?
Yeah, there is a national piece of work, because Mike has hit on something that is Oh, sorry, I think so Mike has hit on something that is absolutely huge. And like I said in my section, giving access to over 6,000 nurses and other students to the NHS infrastructure, where that's been patchy before, we're now trying to coordinate that in Wales, and you can imagine the undertaking that is. So we're not quite there yet. Things do take time, but I am hopeful, with fingers crossed, that 2022 is the year that we realise this. I'm not being nailed down to any particular month or week or day, but I am hoping that we see this access in 2022, because giving temporary access to our students moving forward isn't appropriate, and I think there's been recognition of that in Welsh Government. And as for the devices, they are different devices everywhere. I'm sure if they can access through the internet, they should be able to access it, but there will be some restrictions in some areas from our IT departments. So we might have to work through some of that. Certainly, I think Mike works in Cardiff, so that might be something when the Cardiff implementation happens that I'm sure could be worked through to lift some of the restrictions around access if the system he talks about is on the web page.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie. Is that over to me again? Thank you, Leslie, very much indeed. I think, certainly we know that Welsh Government has commitment through the All Wales Infrastructure Review Programme to resolve the issue of NADEX. However, Fran, would you like to explain what happens with the temporary user accounts for students for login in the interim?
Yes, of course. So at the moment, with students, whenever they attend on a ward, they will be granted a temporary use account, which is created at the time they actually arrive on the wards. That account currently lasts 1 month. This is where Leslie has identified, it's a temporary measure at the moment. And actually identifying how many temporary users we have, i.e. students and agency staff, based on the implementation of the Welsh Nursing Care Record, has identified this more so. And mentioning what Mike said, it's actually really influenced to bring this conversation to a much higher level. And as both Claire and Leslie have mentioned, there are ongoing discussions around student nurses having what we call in Wales Cymru accounts, NADEX accounts, and those accounts will follow the student throughout their training for 3 years, and actually potentially if they go on to work within the NHS, that account will then follow them into the NHS as well. So at the moment, because we're using temporary accounts, they have a temporary account for 1 month that they grant on the ward that they arrive on, but we are, as mentioned, moving forward that we will have NADEX Cymru accounts for all our students that will follow them throughout their training and potentially into their workplace. And of course they'll follow the same rules as that apply to us in NHS Wales in regards password but setting and how frequently they have to be reset. But that is the plan. But like Leslie said, hopefully it'll be this year, but not really going to held to account for the exact time.
Okay, thank you, Fran. So thank you. So Pauline Tang, who I know, Pauline, hopefully that's answered your question about will passwords for students follow them wherever they go. There's an anonymous question here. Do the records remain in the system once a patient has left the hospital? So previous admission notes can be read easily. Fran, would you like to take that?
Yeah. So yes, they absolutely do. So when the patient leaves hospitals, the document is always live until the patient is discharged, and then it goes into what's called the Welsh Clinical Portal on discharge. However, as we move forward and become more technically enabled, we have something in Wales called the Welsh Clinical Portal, and on our next releases that document is available to anybody to read live. It's published straight away. And actually, like Leslie mentioned, with the community system, with WCCIS, with the emergency system, with mental health, with the new critical care system that's coming, that will absolutely happen. Everybody will have access to the information that they require. And this is why the standardization of documentation was so important, because it allows information to pass backwards and forwards through systems, and it means that that information is available to everybody, the whole vision of the single record.
Okay, thank you. If you can come back to me. Thank you. Yeah, one other question, Leslie, just for you in relation to implementation. Can you describe how you prepare a team ready for implementation?
Yeah. Yes, we've taken a different approach wherever we've gone, really. What we found with the system very early on, because it sort of sells itself. So we thought we'd be doing weeks and weeks of training leading up to a go live date. But what has actually happened is for many people, such as, let's say, our agency staff, and some of you are students maybe working as bank as well, the system, once they have had a little look at it, is quite intuitive and they can go straight in to work with it. So our upfront training has really narrowed. We've put a lot of videos, a lot of time and effort from DHCW has gone into some really good quality videos that we've loaded on all of our systems internally. So our staff who are quite nervous maybe will access the videos beforehand. We've also got a team of nurses who work clinically part-time and work in informatics part-time, and they really help. And we've got some outreach amazing staff from the DHCW team, the business change team, who also work alongside staff in a rollout. If a rollout of an area, say of 3 or 4 wards, might take 2 weeks, then all of these staff are in those areas for questions at handover of shifts, throughout the shifts. So it's more of a hand holding while using, without an awful lot of upfront teaching. And then what you find is they as I said in my presentation, students and staff start showing each other the system and start teaching each other. So it sort of gets a bit self-perpetuating, and you get nurses from other wards who haven't got it come into the wards that have got it to have a look at it before it comes to them, and they can start to see how it can influence their practice. It was lovely for me the other day. I was in a small hospital, and they took the WNCR record of the ward into the handover and actually delivered handover from what was in the record. So I think it's utility out there we haven't fully explored, and I think people are using it in very different ways, but actually using it is probably the best way to learn about it.
Okay, thank you. If you can come back to me. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Leslie. And there are two other questions in the Q&A. When will the account be for the ward alone, or will it include community placements? So that basically the aim with the All Wales Infrastructure Review team looking at this issue around fix, they certainly would want the NADEX for the student to follow you wherever you go. That would be its whole purpose. And Sophie, a student nurse from University of South Wales, is asking, I'm a healthcare support worker as well as a student, and does this mean that I will have 2 NADEX accounts? I think that is a challenge at the moment, but the aim is that, you know, we would want you to have 1 NADEX account, but obviously you'd need to define if you were working as a healthcare support worker or you were actually in your student nurse placement. So this is the detail of the work that is being taken, worked through at the moment to agree a really robust model for Wales. And this is obviously, our student nurses are a priority, but it'll be for all students across Wales. So I think we're running sort of towards the hour, so I would like to say, unless anybody has got anything else that they'd like to add in the Q&A, I would just like to thank everybody here for participating in this afternoon's session. It certainly is a really exciting time. I've been nursing 40 years this year, and I wish I was 21 again to actually see this journey of the Welsh Nursing Care Record, over the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years. We're going to be able to use this data and information for our patients to really be driving forward quality improvements, learning and providing assurance to our patients, to their relatives, and certainly to the organisations that we work in. But we will be able to ensure that we are providing safer care and high quality care through using efficient and effective ways of collecting this data to drive that improvement. So we want you to look out for our Nursing and Midwifery digital newsletter that will be coming out in April, that will be providing a greater summary of the outputs of the stakeholder events that that we're having throughout the month of March. And just to say, diolch yn fawr I ti, I'm really grateful for your time this afternoon, and thank you. Bye bye.